Well, welcome to a special birthday edition of The Kitchen Fun. At least when I am recording this, it is in fact my birthday. And every time a birthday or something that rolls around in our house, there's always this kind of debate. What do you want to do? And one of the questions is, for dinner, do you want to go out and not have to cook, or do you want to just stay in? And while going out sounds good, I mean, it sounds nice to have somebody bring you your food and so you don't have to make it. The truth is, for my family, where there's like 4 of us, by the time we go to any kind of nice restaurant, and all have dinner and maybe a dessert, it's gonna be like $80, maybe even more, to even go to somewhere simple. And I always kind of have a little bit of buyer's remorse after I do that, mostly because I love cooking so much. So today, for my birthday, I thought instead of spending the money doing that, I would spend actually less money doing something at home that I would never do for just a weekday dinner. And so for this birthday, we have a birthday brisket. Now, most of the beef that we eat in our house is actually stuff that we get locally. It was a cow that was raised and processed locally. We actually buy it from the vet that took care of it. This is not that brisket because, frankly, we already ate that brisket. So this is from the store, you know, which is fine. It's actually kind of a medium-sized brisket. You can get a lot bigger ones. This is kind of a medium-sized one. It is a whole brisket. It's right now, it's all there. And so this is what we're gonna do, and of course we're gonna slow cook it like you do, and of course we're gonna do it on the smoker. Now, something about different cuts of beef that are really important to all of this. The brisket actually comes from like this part of the cow. It's like the cow pectoral muscle, and what that means is that the cow spent most of its life resting about 60% of its body weight on this hunk of muscle. And what that means is that this has to be really strong. And because it needs to be really strong, it's full of connecting tissue. And connective tissue is really what makes meat chewy. And at the end of the day, what we really want, especially with beef, is we want it to be tender. And so certain cuts of beef are just kind of come off the cow tender, you know, like the tenderloin, which is this kind of almost cylindrical chunk of muscle that comes actually kind of beneath the bottom of the rib cage on the back of the cow. That muscle group doesn't really have a lot to do, so it's not actually a particularly strong muscle, which means it doesn't have a lot of connecting tissue. It just is tender by default, and that's where you get things like filet mignons from, and those really sort of high-end cuts of beef. There's also not very much. You can have a really big cow, you're still not going to have a whole lot of that tenderloin. So in the cases of those cuts, and you know, frankly, the nicer cuts of meat where you get your sirloin strips or your New York strips or whatever it is, those are from parts of the muscle on the cow that didn't have to work very hard. And in that case, it's just more about rendering this fat. And this is gonna render and become soft and malleable at a pretty low temperature, you know, 130, 140, 150 degrees, you know, for medium. I mean, that's really about all you need. And then that's gonna kind of give itself up and the meat's gonna get really tender. So those you just slap on the grill and you can cook them medium rare, medium, and they'll be fine. In the case of, if you've ever gone to a place that's served like steak tartare, that comes from the filet mignon part of the cow, and just the act of slicing it really thin is enough to tenderize the meat enough to make it palatable. With the heavier, dutier stuff, the muscles that worked a little harder, that's the stuff you're going to use for hamburger, because obviously grinding it up into oblivion is going to loosen up all those connecting tissues, or chop steak, where you know they fill it full of a bunch of little cuts. That's gonna tenderize it. We're gonna use the other methods. We're gonna use heat, because while fat renders, at lower temperatures, connecting tissue will render, like it will become soft and malleable and kind of give up its strength, but not until like 200 degrees, which is why cuts like brisket are often used for smoking and low and slow cooking, where we want the temperature, the whole thing, inside, outside, to get up to a pretty high temp, so that they'll give up all of the goodness and let it go from there. So that's what we're gonna do with this brisket. We're gonna cook it on the smoker. We're gonna cook it to 195 or 200, and then we're gonna try hard to let it sit at that temperature for a good long time, because just because it reaches 195, 198, 200 degrees doesn't mean every connecting tissue automatically goes, okay, bleh, or anything like that. It still takes time for it to break down. So really, the secret of good smoking is patience. Now, I like to trim my briskets. I like to trim it maybe even a little bit more than most people do, because I like leaner slices when we're done. So the first thing that I'm gonna do to this to prep it for smoking is to trim it, and the only way to do that is with your knife and by hand. So we will get to trimming both the bottom and the top of it. All right, now that we've got it all trimmed the way that I like it, we need to add a little bit of seasoning to it before it goes on the smoker. Now, again, there's probably no more divisive topic than barbecue and brisket, as far as how much you trim it, how do you cook it, how do you season it, all that kind of stuff. All I can say to that is you do you. Is my barbecue gonna win any awards? Probably not. Am I gonna love it? Are my family gonna love it? Are my friends gonna love it? Absolutely, it's gonna be delicious. And it's not gonna take me a million years. We actually just did the hardest part, which was the trimming. And now it's just a matter of, putting a little bit of spice mix on it and letting it have a whole bunch of time and a whole lot of smoke. So this is a 50-50 blend of coarse ground pepper and kosher salt, along with a good amount of cumin, garlic, ground garlic, and onion powder. That's kind of just over the years what I've decided I liked. I find it's best to go ahead and do the bottom part first. Just sprinkle it on there. They call it rub. You don't really need to rub it in, but I do think you do need to pat it in. Otherwise, it's just gonna fall off. So again, as much or as little as you want. I know people who just put them in, put their biscuits in, bare without anything on them at all. I think they at least need some salt and pepper. Everything deserves salt and pepper. So put a little on the bottom there, and generously sprinkle on the top. Again, just kind of patting it in, make sure it gets in all the places we want it to get to. Had I planned ahead enough and not just bought this yesterday, the other thing you can do along with the rub is let it sit in a brine, which is just salty water, in your refrigerator for a few days, and that will really infuse the salt deeper in the meat and start the tenderizing process before it even sees the grill. Again, tenderizing, that's what we're going for here. So we're gonna use salt. It's gonna do part of the job. The heat is gonna do most of the job. And at the end of the day, we're gonna have this very, very frankly tough cut of meat down to something that you should just be able to eat with a fork. Like there shouldn't have to be a knife anywhere near the slices once you're done. All right, let's get it into the smoker. So in there among the smoke is our brisket. So I have my smoker set at 225 with the super smoke setting enabled. My temp probe buried deep into the thickest part so that I can keep an eye on the temperatures. And we're about to say goodbye to this for probably several hours until it reaches an internal temperature of like 145 to 150 degrees. And then we can take on the next step. But until then, bye-bye brisket! All right, well, there really isn't much to clean up or anything. That was probably 10 minutes of prep at the most, and now it's just about waiting and patience. So, I guess it's coffee time. Yeah, cooking is fun. All right, well, it has been a few hours now. The brisket has been enjoying its life in the smoker, I assume. I'm gonna check it in a minute, but I know it's getting close, and I know it's getting close because of my handy dandy app. Oh yeah, there's an app for everything. It tells me we're holding steady at 225, and our probe is just hit 144. I'd like to see a couple more degrees in there. What I'm gonna do once it gets up to temp is we'll pull it out, we're gonna wrap it in aluminum foil, and then we're gonna shove it right back in there, and then I'll probably up the temp to about 240 degrees. The super smoke feature on the smoker doesn't work above 225, so I leave it at 225 for as long as I can. But once we get into actually just wanting to get some temp into the meat, you can kick it up to 230 or 240 or even 250 if you want to, just to kind of get things moving along a little bit faster. Because the truth is, after a meat gets to be a certain temp, and that's usually north of about 140, it really doesn't take in much more of the smoke flavor anyway. So you're just kind of making it slow for no real reason, and you do run the risk of drying it out. That is actually why we wrap it in foil. You can wrap it in foil. You can wrap it, some people do it in butcher paper. Sometimes this is called the Texas crutch method. But you want to wrap it in foil because you want to keep as much of that moisture in the meat as possible. Right now we're getting all the flavor inside, which is letting some of the moisture out. We will have gotten most of the flavor inside that we need. We will have built kind of a crust, or what they call a bark on it, which is kind of the drier, denser bit around the edges. It's got some real flavor to it. We will have built most of that we need. So now we can just wrap it all up and basically let it kind of steam itself up to the final temp that we need to get it to. So thinking a few more minutes and then we'll go out and wrap it. Moment of truth time as we take a look-see. I have not opened this since we put it in there, and oh my, yes. Nice bark, got some nice color right there. Smells really good. I can smell the aromatics that we put in the seasoning. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use my silicone barbecue gloves to transfer it onto this foil paper, wrap it up, and then stick it right back in there. Fortunately, I can't hold the camera and do that at the same time. So just hold on a second. And there we are. I did leave the temperature probe installed because I'm still going to want to keep an eye on that. And so now we're going to go ahead and turn our target temp, oop, not quite that high, up to, I'm going to go the full 250. All right. So we're going to say goodbye to it again, and we will see it in a few more hours. So we are now up to about 8.5 hours total, and I have tested the brisket temperature in several different spots, and it has reached a pretty good, consistent 198 to a little over 200 over here. And the challenge I have now is I don't really want it to get any more heat into it, but I'd love it to stay here for a while and continue to break down all that connecting tissue. So we are going to actually transfer it out of the smoker and into my cooler, which will, I guess in this case, be a warmer. And because I'm not adding any additional heat, because there's no heat source in here, it's just going to sit in there and stay at fairly consistent temperature for a while, and then continue to break down all that connecting tissue. So we're going to move it from here to here and let it sit in there for probably about an hour. And then we'll see what kind of tastiness we have come up with. All right, so our brisket has now been in the cooler for 45 minutes, and we are about 8 hours, 8.5 hours all in. Now, that's gonna sound like a lot of time, but in reality, it really isn't. There was maybe 10, 15 minutes of prep before it went into the smoker, another 10, 15 minutes wrapping it up in the foil, a little bit of time to throw it into here, and now we're done. And so while a lot of time has elapsed, there really isn't a lot of work that had to be done to get us to this phase. So let's see how we did. Pop the top off. Ooh, I don't know if you can see all that steam coming out, but it looks good, and it smells good. Put on my rubber mitts here, because it's still gonna be really hot, even though it's been in here for a while. You know, coolers are good at keeping cold in, and they're also really good at keeping heat in. So let's see how we're gonna get this out of here. Might be easier if I just take it down like this. Pull it out that way. Off to the side. All right, let's see how we did. Oh, the good smells continue. Well, it definitely looks the part, and it smells amazing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna slice a little off this thin end and see how we ended up. Ugh, squeaky squeak. All right, well, you can see we've got some nice pink color in there, really still really juicy, and yeah, it's just gonna fall right apart. I mean, it just falls apart. Oh man, that is just amazing. Now, remember, this is a very, very, very tough, hard-working muscle in the cow. If we cooked it any other way, if we didn't cook it this long, if we didn't let all that connecting tissue break down, I mean, it would basically be almost like chewing gum. But because we did all that, it just kind of falls apart just like it's supposed to. And that's it. Now, you can put a lot more time into this. You can, you know, play around with the seasonings. You can do all sorts of things, really whatever you want to do. But in the truth, like, the world's greatest barbecue is the one that you make that brings joy to you and your family and your friends who enjoy it with you. And that really is the point of all of this. I really don't actually like those sites that say, learn how to make the world's greatest barbecue. And I'm like, am I going to win a competition with it? Probably not. Are my friends going to enjoy eating it when they come over? Are they going to tell me how good it is and how much they love it? Yeah, they're gonna. And my family's going to do the same thing. And at the end of the day, that's the point. If this doesn't all bring you joy, then what are we doing here? But this, on my birthday, brings me more joy than any meal in any restaurant could. And, you know, we'll eat a bit of it, and then we'll have a whole bunch of leftovers to either, you know, vacuum seal and throw in the freezer for who knows how long, or to slice up and use for any number of other things. So thank you for enjoying and with me and being with me for my birthday brisket. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again on The Kitchen Fun.